People who have encountered supernatural beings, other scary things, ghosts, etc. What happened? If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this. When I was about 17, I was at my friend's apartment building, which his parents owned. We had an apartment to hang out in on the top floor and used to go to the roof to smoke. This apartment building was pretty old and, according to his parents, was at one point owned by Al Capone. My friend had his own experience once where he woke up to someone sitting at the edge of his bed watching him sleep, so we think that it is haunted. Anyway, one night we were about to go up, but I had to pee, so I told him I'd meet him up there. After I was done, I went up the stairs to the attic portion that was connected to the roof. There were no lights, so we always used our phones to guide us. It was an old building and the attic was creepy and cluttered all the time. As I made my way to the roof door, I saw a shadow pass by me. I followed the direction it went, thinking it was my friend. I kept saying that I knew it was him and to stop playing around. It passed me a few more times, when I heard my friend's voice from downstairs. He got a call from his girlfriend and was in another room talking to her the whole time. I have no idea what that shadow figure was, but it really freaked me out. I told my friend what happened and that I did not want to go back up there, and I refused to go back up there for a long time. One thing for people to consider that has been mentioned when I've told this story before is that it was not my own shadow, since the only light up there was coming from my phone, which I held in front of me. When I was a kid until I became about 15, I used to see a Doberman pincer out of the corner of my eye, only for it to never be there when I looked at it. Later on, when I was just talking to my dad about these type of things, he said we had one when I was a toddler and she would herd me around to keep me out of things. It gave him the chills. Also, I grew up in an old nursing home. I mean, like 1900 old, that had been modernized. I would wake up sometimes because the TV was loud, only to walk to the living room to find about 6 skeletons laughing at the TV. I never felt scared around them, only annoyed that they had woke me up. Then when I moved to a neighborhood where there used to be a Civil War gun factory, with old railroad tracks behind our place, we would hang out there. We were back there one night, walking, and I felt like something was following us. I stopped my friend to look behind us, and we saw something black and shapeless, coming at us fast. It was far away but growing really fast. We took off and didn't look back. It creeped us out bad. So I live in a small town in Yorkshire, England, that is known by locals as a bit of a hotbed for things forgotten. The town itself isn't any different from any of the other villages close by, all being ex-coal towns. These little villages fueled the fires of the empire. Life was short and hard for many. The average age in the area used to be 15, similar to many of the other northern cities. This led to a culture of excess. Even the poorest would spend vast amounts on meats and everything. Simply, every meal could have been your last. Make merry and enjoy life when you can. Before I tell you my story, I must make you aware that this little village has some nasty truths. People go mad, and only a few years ago a man was apparently possessed by no less than 64 different demons. He was subjected to an exorcism that was only partially successful, ridding him of most of demons. Except, arguably the most important, murder. They sent him home to rest before they finished of the exorcism the next day. That morning, he was found wandering the streets, covered in his family's blood. Overlooking the village is a large copper tower of the House of Mercy, an old convent for unmarried mothers. We all know what happened to them and their babies. It's just a matter of time before someone finds the carnal ditches. The tower overlooks narrow cobblestone streets and stacked, early Victorian houses and shops. Snaking between these are the ginnels. Countless paths between, some no more than a few feet across, mazing between high stone walls and garden fences. Trees block most natural light, and it's not uncommon for the light-sensitive street lights to be on midday. Not like they make much of a difference. At night, it's almost impossible to see. Just the air of unease puts most locals off using them, even in broad daylight. It's on these narrow paths that the village first paranormal resident resides. Mainly on the ginnel named Jenkin Road. It goes by the name Padfoot, a shook, a large dog, as tall as a man's chest. These demon black dogs are well known in Britain, some being Nick himself, others the souls of abused animals. Sometimes, especially in the case of the gabble ratchets of Leeds, unbaptized infants. J.K. Rowling based the character of Sirius Black of this legend. Now I wish I could tell you the story of how I came face to face with a devil dog and had to beat it off with a stick. My story involves another creature who lives close by, a member of the Unseelie court, the Boggart. Whilst it isn't technically a traditional Boggart, it is still something left over from the days of old. It is most commonly seen in an area called Watson's Yard. An area that happens to be on my walk home from the local pub. Records of it go well back. The earliest recorded case was in the late 14th century. The Boggart is always described the same, hunched, a bloated rotten corpse, with long matted fur and over-proportioned bulbous head. Its eyes flicker green and red and it is surrounded by a odor of dead meat. What I saw that night was exactly this. I'd been later from work. This was at a similar time as the passing of a distant aunt, whose windfall came in the same weekend. Like any 19-year-old, I took them both part and parcel and went to get drunk. After 9 hours and God knows how many pints, the pub closed. This was a Sunday night and as always the village is dead and quiet. I begin to head home, but literally as I set off, nature calls. Not being one for street urination, I slink off into one of the many yards. Before I know it, I'm giving Mother Nature a golden shower. I give my spam javelin a wiggle and just as I button up I see something out my eye corner. Moving slowly, almost skipping in its step. I'm shocked at first and step back, and just like in those movies, I step on something that goes snap. It turns and my eyes meet its eyes. They didn't glow, but sort of reflected ambient light, similar to a cat. It changed direction and starts to come towards me. That's when I bolted all the way home. What would usually take a good quarter of an hour's walk I did in 5. Worst thing was I never looked back, so when I got to my door and couldn't get it to open I started to panic. Of course, there was nothing following me. I got into my house and jumped right into bed. The whole thing freaked me out so much, that the next morning, I took to Google to put my mind at rest what I saw. That's when I learned about the village's connection with the paranormal. The best way to describe what I saw that night was similar to chimpanzee, the body shape and hunched posture. It had a much larger belly and its face could only be described as Hoggle from Labyrinth mixed with a pug. I have never been able to put pen to paper and give it justice. Recently I've been teaching myself prop making skills as I want to go into theater. Writing this has given me the idea to try and construct, even just its face to see if I can recreate it. First off, I never thought that I would actually believe in ghosts. What I am about to tell you really happened to me and I'm not making anything up. One evening, I don't remember the exact day and time, it was already getting dark when my friend and I went from his house into the Stadtwald. Compared to other German forests, the Stadtwald in Cologne, my home, is rather small. You can't really get lost there, but it still gets pretty dark at night. Being at the edge of the city, there weren't many people there. We thought we were alone. Every minute or so you could hear a car driving along the main road in the distance. We went deeper inside as the sun went down. At some point we heard an odd noise in the distance. Moving closer, the sound became clearer. It was the most beautiful singing I've ever heard. A female voice was coming from the dark forest, singing an opera. My friend was so scared at this point that he did not want to go any further, but I really wanted to know what it was. It had to be a concert/party/festival, I thought, and went deeper into the darkness. The singing became louder and louder, and at one point, I was standing right in front of the source. It was pitch black. The ground was covered in dried leaves, so whatever was standing there must, without a doubt, have heard me approaching. But the singing didn't stop. The source must have been right in front of me as I was engulfed by the beautiful singing. At this point I realized that there was no party in the forest, and I got so scared that I ran back to my friend and we left. We could still hear the singing until we were out of reach. I swear, this really happened. And since this day I believe in ghosts. I was playing with a Ouija board with some friends a few years ago in my basement. We lit some candles and turned off the lights to set the mood. We all had our fingers on the planchette, started asking if questions, and it was actually providing legit answers. We were supposedly talking to a ghost named Owen who died in the 60s when he was 18. My house was built on old farmland in the late 60s. I wasn't convinced that the planchette was actually moving on its own, so I picked up one of the candles that had 3 wicks and said, "Okay Owen, if you're actually real, blow out this candle," and all motherfucking 3 wicks went out in an instant, and we all ran upstairs screaming. Needless to say, I am a firm believer in ghosts now. Was sleeping one night with dirty clothes under my bed. The previous night I had a wet dream and was too lazy to do anything about the clothes, so I left them under my bed. Cue to around 3 in the morning. I had an absolutely lucid nightmare, so real yet so outlandish. I can't really explain it besides how shaken I was when I finally woke up. Worst part is over, right? Nope. As I turn to go to sleep again, after having woken up, I feel a man sit on my bed with his back to my back. I can literally feel this. It is in no way a hallucination. Mind you, the room is pitch black. So this being one of my first experiences with anything like this, I'm paralyzed as to my next move. Should I turn and face the thing? Well, I had no choice in the end as I saw another figure approaching from the direction I was facing and, suddenly, a red flash. I was unconscious for what felt like 10 seconds. I woke up and then the thing was gone. I couldn't sleep after that till morning came. Needless to say, I scrapped the dirty clothes first thing the next morning. In high school, I was on my way to a Chinese buffet to meet my parents for dinner. The restaurant was off of a main road, 2 lanes each way with a turning lane in the middle. I got over into the turning lane quite early thinking the restaurant was closer than it was. The road was mostly empty however, so I just went on down the turning lane another quarter mile or so. Suddenly, directly in front of me is a woman, just standing there. She had to have seen me coming way before I saw her. She never even tried to get out of my way. I slammed on my brakes and she just stood there and watched me come. At the very last second she sort of just stepped to the side so that when my car stopped she was standing right at my passenger side window. I sat there for a moment waiting for my heart to start beating again and was starting to think I should roll that window down to apologize and ask if she was okay. About that time I heard a sound that chilled me to the bone. The click of a locked door handle being tried. She was trying to get into my fucking car. Luckily at this point I was directly in front of the restaurant. I floored it into the parking lot. I parked, ran inside, and took a seat next to a window looking out at the place where the woman had been. She was gone. She wasn't in the road, she wasn't in the lot. She was nowhere. The restaurant was directly across the street from a large graveyard. Made me feel a bit squidgy. Okay, so, you guys know what shadow people are? As the name suggests, they're people but like, just the shadow as its own entity. Back when I was maybe 11 or 12, near a decade ago, a friend of mine and I were out in his back forest. We were in a swampy bit with a bunch of brush that grew up above our heads. It was probably only about 6 or so, but that was still way taller than us at the time. Anyway, as we're making our way through the brush, I see what looks like a head and shoulders, but completely black, rise up over the shrubbery, and then dart back down. I think nothing of it, I just assume I'm seeing things. We emerge from the thick brush out onto a trail lined with brush on either side, maybe 7 wide or so. As we walk down it, we see what looks like the silhouette of someone hunched over bolt from one side of foliage to the other. We look at each other, turn, and run back to his house as fast as we can. The plant life on either side was undisturbed, and the figure made no noise. To this day, we don't truly know what we saw. His mom said maybe it was a coyote or something, but I know that's not it. It was January 2006 and my girlfriend and I were headed from Las Vegas to Sacramento. It was the last leg of a road trip we were taking from Minnesota to California. Since we had already been on the road for 5 days, we wanted to expedite the trip as much as possible. Rather than drive through Los Angeles, and adding far more time to the trip, we looked at a map and found a route via a Highway 58. Unfortunately, in order to get to Highway 58, we had to take an old Highway 58 first. It was about 9 p.m. and there were no cars on old Highway 58 with us. The sky was cloudless and filled with stars. The desert outside my car seemed lifeless. It didn't take long before my girlfriend and I got weary about this unbeaten path. She talked about maybe just going through Los Angeles because it may have been safer. I pushed ahead though, thinking that the time we'd save was worth the weird feelings we were having. According to our map, the connection from old Highway 58 to Highway 58 was about 15 miles ahead of us. During that drive, we stared out the windows while joking about getting lost. As the 20-minute mark came and went, we didn't see a turnoff for Highway 58. We were beginning to get real nervous. Then, ahead of us going right across the road was a huge wall of fog. Being from Minnesota, it was a common occurrence to see fog on roads with lakes and ponds nearby, so I didn't think much of it right away. Of course, we were in Southern California with desert all around us. As I drove into the fog, I couldn't see anything. I moved my foot to the brake to slow down, not wanting to hit anything, but before I knew it the car came out the other end. My girlfriend looked at me, confused about the fog. I smiled at her and pressed on, wanting to find the turnoff to Highway 58 more than anything. So we kept driving. We went another 15 minutes without seeing a single car. I remember looking for any sign of life or movement around us but saw nothing. Even the houses on the side of the road were lifeless. No lights on outside, no lights on inside. They appeared only as shadows of their former selves. It truly felt like we were the only ones in the world. That feeling would soon disappear. After another 5 minutes or so, I came to a big bend in the road. As I came around it, I saw a bright orange light way down in front of us. I had 2 thoughts right away. Good, another car. And maybe that means we are close. That is when it started acting strangely. It moved back and forth on the road in front of us as it moved closer. It was as if it was strafing to dodge bullets. I was so confused, But my brain was telling me that it was just a motorcycle. One light, moving easily between lanes, it has to be a motorcycle. It kept getting closer and closer to us and I kept slowing down and down. Going about 20 miles per hour, the light finally reached about 15 yards in front of me and that's when the light turned at us, blinding me. My first reaction was that the motorcycle was coming right at my car, so I turned the wheel to the right. When I realized the car was going into the ditch, I looked away from the light and pulled the car back onto the road. I sped up and looked into the rear view mirror, seeing nothing. No light, no anything. Just blackness. My girlfriend was immediately asking questions like, what just happened? And what if that motorcyclist needed help? I just knew I had to get out of there. Looking into her own mirror and seeing nothing behind us, she too realized that it wasn't just a motorcyclist. That bright of light would easily have lit up the road behind us, but it wasn't. Not to mention motorcycles have rear lights. We kept driving and about 3 minutes later we came across another wall of fog. I drove through it and on the other side was a dead-end sign. Great. That meant we had to turn around and I was not looking forward to seeing that light again. After turning around, the wall of fog that was just there was gone. It felt like a huge weight was lifted from our shoulders, as well. As we went past the area where the light was, there was nothing. We also started to see cars on the road and those houses that were housed in darkness were alive with porch lights and TVs on in the windows. We eventually went back to Barstow and asked a gas station attendant where the connection to Highway 58 was. He said just go up Old Highway 58 for about 15-20 minutes and you'll see it on the left. So, hesitant, we decided to give it another shot. This time, we found the turn with no problem. It was right where that first wall of fog was. I couldn't see the sign that pointed to it the first time. So we made it to Highway 58 and eventually Sacramento. All we could think about during the rest of our trip was what we just witnessed, and what those walls of fog were. But that's not the whole story. As I looked into the orange light as it shined onto us, I didn't make out something behind it. It wasn't a face, it wasn't a torso. It was just a leg, kicking down at the ground like a bull does before it charges. Or, like a motorcyclist kick-starting his motorcycle. To this day I can't forget that image, and any time I am driving at night and see a single light on the road in front of me, my heart skips a beat. Some people have told me that it sounds like we went into another dimension, with fog/rivers often being gateways to and from other worlds. I don't know anything about that, but I do know what I experienced that night. During my second semester of freshman year in college I started having some really weird dreams. Nothing too crazy, but really scary stuff just the same. The dream was always the same. I would be in my bed late at night and I would feel like I was being watched. I would sit up in bed and invariably the huge closet that was on the wall opposite the end of my bed would be open and a man would be crouched in the closet with his arms wrapped around his knees staring at me. He had caramel-colored skin, no hair, and black eyes. He would never interact with me, he would never move, but he would always be there watching me while I slept. I would always wake up from the dream terrified and I would have to leave my dorm room and go to a common area to calm myself down enough to get back to sleep. One night, with about 2 months left in the semester, I mentioned this while hanging out with some other guys from my floor. Turns out I wasn't the only one having this dream, except other people reported him doing different things. The guy in the dorm to the right of me said that the caramel man was standing at the foot of his bed, and the guy in the dorm to the right of me said the caramel man would sit cross-legged at the foot of his bed and watch him sleep. Caramel man never did anything, he just watched everyone sleep. This freaked everyone the fuck out, obviously. The resident assistant who was in charge of our floor was a Pentecostal Christian who believed in speaking in tongues and demons and all of that stuff. He called his pastor and had him come to our floor the next day and they prayed in every room to bind and rebuke the spirit and protect the students. I didn't hear anything more from anybody else on the floor, but I definitely kept seeing the same person every night for a few more weeks until it finally just stopped on its own. I've since come to understand that what I was experiencing was most likely sleep paralysis, but that doesn't really explain how or why other people around me on the same floor were seeing the same figure manifesting in different positions when I hadn't told anyone what I was seeing before that night. We all realized we were seeing the same thing. Many years ago I was at a slumber party at my friend's house. Like typical teenaged girls, we decided to try a seance that night for fun. We ended up deciding on contacting my friend's grandma. We figured we could ask her questions and my friend could verify. So we turn off all the lights and sit on the floor in a circle holding hands and put a candle in the middle of us. We ask the spirit of grandma to possess the candle, and when we ask her a question to answer by making the flame stand still for yes, and to continue flickering for no. We start asking questions but the candle just flickers. Probably didn't help that we were all breathing toward it. But then a few minutes later we all hushed up when we suddenly heard the bed lightly creaking as if someone was sitting down on it. My friend asked, "Is that you sitting on the bed?" And I shit you not, the candle flame stood up still. We all just stared at each other for a second. Our fun game now started to feel pretty eerie. We try asking a few more questions but the candle just flickers. And then we hear the closet door directly behind my friend and I creaking like it's being leaned on. So I ask, "Is that you by the door?" And the flame stands still. My friend then says, "Come and sit with us." It was at that moment that my friend and I both felt something we will never forget. Even 17 years later, whenever we happen to see each other, it always comes up. What felt like a cold dead hand enveloped both of our joined hands. The shock of the coldness made me scream and jump back, and she also did so at the exact same time. We just stared at each other in disbelief, and our other friends were wondering what the hell happened. She asked me if I felt that, and I said I did and ran to go turn on the lights. That was the first and last time I ever fucked around with the spirit world. Never shared before and not super creepy, but here you go. When I was 4, we bought a house in our town because the one we used to live in was destroyed by a tornado while we were in the shelter beneath it. Anyway, I grew up in a religious household, so ghosts and hauntings weren't really discussed. The hall that led to the bedrooms and bathroom had the most activity. Just phantom footsteps on carpet, and cold spots when there was no explanation for them. Mind you, I remember experiencing these things before I knew what they could mean. I must have been about 11 and we had a landline, old AF, that had one of those 10-foot cords on it. I was talking on the phone in the middle of the night and looked up into a mirror that was in between the den and kitchen, facing the French doors that opened to the patio, and saw a woman dressed in a very dated nightgown. She was so sad it took my breath away. I have no idea of the history of the land, but the house was moved from its original place because the city flooded the original town and made it a lake. My house was a doctor's house back in the day. I was staying the night over at my friend's house one night. We were 12 or 13 and we were up late, like you do at a sleepover at that age. We were the only ones down in the basement and we had been awake the entire time. His basement had this little section of it that was a gym treadmill, a few weights, a yoga ball, stuff like that. This section of it was kind of messy, so nobody really ever went back there. Anyway, we were sitting on his couch down there watching TV when we heard the yoga ball bouncing. If you have never heard a yoga ball bounce, it has a very distinct sound that you really can't mistake for anything else. We are a bit confused, so we get up to go see what it was. As we walked to the entrance of the gym section, the ball just rolled out to us. Again, we were the only ones down there and nobody could have come down without us seeing. Suddenly we were both hit with this ice cold chill and we both heard "come play." We got out of that part of the basement as fast as we could. As it turns out, the dad in the family who first owned the house killed his daughter and wife in that room before committing suicide. This was a number of years ago when I was still with my ex-husband. Background: I was pagan, had an onyx ring for our coven that was meant for protection from negative energy. I had just purchased a new one on the day of the incident. After having a cigarette outside with my ex and his apprentice, I went to go turn out the garage light because the boys left it on earlier when taking out the trash. As I was walking out of the garage into the house, I was in a little hallway between the garage and the kitchen, with another hallway in between leading either to one of the bedrooms or the dining room. As I'm in this hallway facing the kitchen, I received a text response from a friend, so I stopped to reply. As I'm texting, I feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up and I hear this growl. Now there are no animals in the house, as the owner's pet chihuahua had recently been run over and the doggy door was too small to let any other dogs in, but I proceeded to look around to see if one got in. That's when I felt it looking at me like I was prey. I instantly felt, as I believe, and small animal feels when a predator is watching it. I felt it right in front of me, but I couldn't see anything. I attempted to shield myself with energy, but as I did, I felt it steal that energy from me. Terrified, I ran upstairs as fast as I could to where my ex and his apprentice were and explained to them what happened. I ran out front to attempt to ground myself. As I was sitting there with my hands on the earth, I heard rustling next to me, and that same growl. I still couldn't see anything, all the birds had stopped chirping. I attempted to use my energy again to shield myself, and yet again I felt it steal it from me. I ran back inside where my ex was saging the house. We went upstairs to one of the empty rooms, where my ex brought out his scrying mirror in an attempt to contact whatever it was. I laid down mainly out of emotional exhaustion as I was quite hysterical. I had never been more terrified in my life. I don't remember what happened next. I blacked out, and when I woke up my ex explained to me what happened. He had contact with whatever it was, an abyssal being that latched onto me, feeding off my fear. I used to pride myself in my energy work. Feeling him steal it from me made me feel so helpless. My ex trapped it inside his mirror. After the ordeal, my ex was drawing what he had seen, and I was doing the same even though I couldn't see it with my physical eyes. There was an image of it in my mind. We drew the exact same thing. Without mentioning a word of it to each other. When I have the time, I'll look for my drawing. Also, the onyx ring I had purchased that day turned out to be a fake. Not real onyx, found that out a few weeks after the incident. After my ex making me feel like shit for not being able to protect myself, and pretty much being just a straight up douche for not believing me when I told him I literally did everything I could to do so. Asshole. I've only ever come across one person or one story that I put any stock into, partially because of the people involved and because of the nature of the occurrences. This story is told secondhand from the wife of my godfather and my godfather, and it's been a while since they've retold it to me, so there's details missing, but I have the gist. So they are newlyweds in 1994 doing a honeymoon road trip to a place on Prince Edward Island where they will stay for a week, taking a week to get there from Toronto, stopping in Montreal and Bangor, Maine along the way. Their wedding had been a few months prior, but they delayed the honeymoon because my godfather's mother was sick and she passed away not long after. The trip is going fine and all is normal for the first few days, and they have a lovely time in Montreal. My godfather grabs a couple books at little bookstore in Montreal to occupy them in Bangor, which is the next stop. He ends up grabbing a Stephen King because he hails from Maine. He ended up picking up Insomnia, a book about a guy who can't sleep in Derry, Maine, and starts experiencing some weird things. They leave Montreal and soon have crossed the border into Maine. They have a hotel in downtown Maine that they planned to stay at but didn't have reservations. They arrive at the hotel and it's booked up, no room. Which they found odd as it was the middle of the week and wasn't holiday season or anything like that, and the parking lot was empty when they came in. But they shrugged it off and left. First sign something weird was going on was that the parking lot that they swore had been empty just minutes before was now packed. They didn't realize it until they got into their car, sat down and looked around before looking at each other completely confused. Weird, but not let's get the fuck out of here weird. So they move on to find another hotel. They find one farther from downtown, but this one had a lobster buffet with a room deal, so that was a bonus. When they arrived, this parking lot was packed to brim. Again weird, but not weird enough to raise any red flags, and they thought, hey, this must be a really popular lobster buffet. They walked up to what they only describe as a thin, spindly man who looks like he might snap if you grabbed him, running the front desk. He moves really slow and doesn't say much. They ask about a room, half expecting to be told they are also booked up, but the man says of course and sets them up with a room. Before they walk away, he says, "You're not from around here, are you?" Which puzzled them because they are at a hotel, you know, where out of townies stay. But they replied with a suspicious "no, we're not." And the guy just said, "I thought not," and that was that. At this point they are living in the world of slightly odd but not off-putting. They get up to their room and settle in, get changed, and decide that it's about prime time to hit up this buffet. They got down there for dinner expecting a decent crowd, but it was deserted save for the hotel staff. Parking lot empty again. Now they just have an uneasy feeling and decide to skip the buffet and go to a restaurant in town. They claim that they didn't see another person or car until they were a couple blocks from the hotel. They have a nice dinner in town and everything is normal. Time to go back to weird hotel, and neither of them are particularly stoked, but they are tired and were only planning on staying one night so they would be on the road the next day. They get back and the parking lot is still empty, which was almost comforting to them at this point, at least it was staying one way. The lobby of this place was a small hallway, so walking in everyone had to go by the front desk. And the thin man is still there and just slightly smiling and staring as they walked through to their room. Staring hard and absolutely following them with his gaze until they were through another hallway. Creeped them out, but screw it, we're here and tired, let's just go to sleep. My godfather never touched the book he bought in Montreal as he just didn't end up having as much free time as he anticipated, so the one single copy of the book in the room was in his bag and had stayed there the whole time. They go to sleep and everything is honky-dory. 4:30 a.m. the hotel phone rings, wakes up my godfather's wife and she's startled and confused but answers the phone and there's no one there. Not even a dial tone, odd. But she then notices my godfather still asleep but absolutely trembling and pouring sweat next to her. She tries to wake him up, shaking him, but he's having a full-blown episode of sorts. She quickly jumps out of bed and her feet land on a really strange feeling surface. She realizes the whole room has flooded and there's an inch or two of water in the room. But on top of that, she's stepping on all these objects. She gets over to the light and switches it on and there's tens of copies of the fucking book all strewn in the water on the floor. Now she's extremely confused and worried and getting scared that my godfather won't wake up. She's at the side of the bed really trying to shake him awake. And all of a sudden he's up like lightning, breathing extremely heavy and looking lost. She calms him down and he's realizing where he's at and what's going on, and he says to her, "What the fuck did you with the water?" She was kind of a prankster and I guess he thought it was some sort of joke, but then he saw all the books everywhere and she looked at him and said, "Ian, this is not me. I don't know what's going on." And she must have been pretty damn convincing because they both quickly packed their things, soaked or not, and tried to get the hell out of the room as quickly as possible. It's probably closer to 5 a.m. now and they are wet and disheveled, making their way down to the front desk. They round the corner and there's Thin Man immediately meeting their gaze. This guy has been on the desk since the early afternoon the previous day. "Having some issues with the room?" is what he said before they said anything. That much would have been obvious by their appearance, but they go, "Yeah, actually we've just woken up and the room has flooded." They weren't sure how to bring up the books or if they even should. But Thin Man just smiled and said, "Happens all the time," with an inordinate amount of glee in his voice. Thoroughly creeped out now, they just wanted to leave. The man said he would charge them for the cheapest room in the hotel to make up for the flooding, and they just said, "Sure, fine, whatever gets us the fuck out of here quickest." They come out to a once again packed parking lot but not a person in sight. They hit the road so fast that she's holding the bags in her lap instead of throwing the bags in the trunk of their two-seater. Once they were a decent ways out of town, my godfather turns to his wife and says, "Lori, when you woke me up I was having a dream that I was at the beach. My mother was way out in the water and she started calling me in, say, 'Come in, Ian, please come in and come with me.' I started walking out and was at my waist and it was freezing. I was so cold but I had to keep going to see her, and then I was awake so fast I could feel myself being pulled out of the water." He doesn't like to talk about that story very much and he's never actually relayed any details. He sat there and nodded and confirmed things quietly and quite uncomfortably while his wife shares the story. It's his reluctance to talk about it and his straightforwardness and every other aspect of his being that make me believe it's a true story. He swears he only bought one book but insists that there had to be at least 30 copies in that hotel room. I'll have to ask and find the name of the hotel, but needless to say they haven't been back. I was a kiddo and I swore this old woman would walk around inside my house at night. She reminded me of my grandma, so it didn't freak me out too much. I kept telling my mom, who didn't believe me. I described her hair, what she wore, her slippers, but she wouldn't believe. About a month later she's talking to our landlord, who she was cool with, about me having dreams about this old woman wandering around our house. As my mom tells it, when she described the woman, the landlord got very uncomfortable. I had been describing one of his old tenants who killed herself in the basement. I was 10, my nanny had just passed away from a stroke that left her face down on the kitchen floor in front of the door, for a day or two. My cousin found her, she was rough to the hospital and she passed a couple days after that. My family and I, mom, dad, 2 younger sisters, were at her house finishing up some cleaning because we had stayed a few days. We were all packed up and everyone was getting into the car. I had a bad habit of forgetting things when I was younger, so I took a few extra minutes to sweep the house to make sure nothing was left behind. As I was headed through the kitchen to the front door, I heard the sound of the water being turned on and running out of the bathroom faucet. So I stopped and looked through the hall into the bathroom. I realized I wasn't imagining it, someone had turned the faucet on. So I went to investigate. It was on, full blast. I had a lump in my throat and my heart was pounding. I still get the feeling of anxiety to this day remembering this. I walked into the bathroom and turned the faucet off and then practically ran out the front door to my parents. I'm not sure why, but to me, it was my nanny getting one last look at me and saying goodbye. "I miss you, Nan." Also, my grandparents live in a 200-year-old house in Maine. Growing up, I was always told about Elva the Greep, as my aunts and uncles named the ghost in the house. Every time my sisters and cousins would stay over when we'd visit, there would be a happening of some sort. Rocking chair moving, steps in the 3rd attic above our heads. Lastly, I remember exploring upstairs and we were making our way up to the forbidden attic. I'm sure it was forbidden because the floors were not sturdy and it was packed full of shit. I used to pride myself on being very brave, so I was the first one to crawl up the steep stairs. I didn't make it all the way up before seeing a noose hung from a buttress of wood in the ceiling. Also, there is a graveyard on the property my grandparents own, and my dad has reported over his lifetime seeing a gravedigger with a noose multiple times in the same spot in the graveyard. I just graduated from college and was about to take the licensure examination. Me and my friends stayed in a dormitory run by nuns, which used to be an orphanage way back. The place was situated on the mountain with easy access to the city and was quite secluded. A cemetery was also close by. We were there so that we could focus on studying for the exam, and it was quite cheap. One day, I was studying on my desk inside my room with the door ajar, which was just beside the door. When out of the corner of my eye I saw someone peeking at the door. Just by instinct, I took a look and it was someone or something that I will never forget. It was a boy, maybe 10 to 15. He was burned and naked. His skin was black and charred. His eyes were white and he has this creepy wide smile. I made eye contact maybe just a few seconds, but it felt like it lasted for minutes. I don't really know what happens next, but he just bolted. Then I don't know what got into me, maybe I was just scared or curious, but I chased him through the corridors into a dead end. That's when this really weird feeling came over me. Something like dread, like someone was watching me. I didn't mention this to my friends since we were quite anxious with the coming exam, and I just pretended it was just me being stressed out. Days after the event, we were chilling in one of the rooms when we decided to share some ghost stories. One of my neighbor directly in front of our room shared that she sometimes see boy with the same description as the one I saw that would keep on peeking inside my room. From that day on I kept my doors closed and locked. I got other stories from this dormitory too, but this one's always give me the creeps. Little bit of background, my home used to be part of an old town in the 1800s that was burned down by angry Native Americans. From what I heard, the occupants that were captured were also killed. One night I was fast asleep in my bed. And it being summertime in Texas, oftentimes it gets hot. Strangely enough, this wasn't the case. I awake around 3 a.m. to an unexpected chill in my room. Logically, I open my eyes to look around for a blanket nearby while staying still. Suddenly, I begin to hear light scratching at my bed frame near where my head was. By this time, I'm fully awake and wondering what's going on. I laid still with my eyes open as the scratching continued and a voice whispering, "Shush. Quiet." Over and over again. I sit up in my bed and the voice is gone. There was nothing there that would logically make that noise. No TV, no mice, nothing. Just me and my lamp on. Recently, there has been a certain someone/something lurking around the house. It likes to crack open the door and peek into the room as if it's curious of what you're doing. Then quickly vanish. It only takes the form of a shadow and has been spotted by everyone who lives here. On several occasions, there has been this incessant knocking in the middle of the night. Whether it be on the kitchen door, front door, in the walls, in the room, wherever. Whatever it is surely likes to annoy people. I and some family members did an overnight at the Villisca axe murder house in Villisca, Iowa. Back in the early 1900s, someone broke in and killed 2 parents, their 3 kids and a neighbor kid staying overnight. In the morning, he cooked breakfast and left. He was never caught. They gave us the key and a brief tour of the house, then left for the night. We walked around and observed everything. We didn't experience much as a group, but it was fun to walk around and act like real ghost hunters. Some people claim to have seen reflections, others to hearing stuff while catching a few minutes of sleep, but nothing concrete. We wanted something tangible like a photo or recording to prove something was there. Around 1 a.m., we went upstairs to the kids' room. The room was furnished with kids' toys, balls, clothes, etc. things to make it feel like a kid's room. We sat around, asked questions and hoped for a reply. Nothing happened, but I did leave my phone on recording before we went downstairs. After an hour and a half, I came back up and got my phone. As we were in the living room, I out in some earbuds and began listening to the recording. I heard our group walking and talking down the stairs and the audio trailed off as we went. Then I heard it. A ball bounced, then stopped. After a 2 seconds delay, the ball bounced. Bounced as if dropped. Then a click. I was stunned as not a single person in our group was upstairs. We all listened to it and decided we had to try and debunk it. A few of us went back up to see if we could recreate the sound. The only way we could do it was with someone inside the kids' room, dropping a ball, then catching it on the rebound. Then, after waiting a few seconds, dropping it again. The only way the ball bouncing was loud enough was if the door was open to the closet. It was closed both when we left and when we returned. I get chills still thinking of it and cannot wait to go back. We are planning a trip in 2018. We plan to be much more prepared for recording our visit.